We begin with the U.S. men's national team. On Saturday in Landover, Maryland, they played the first of their two pre-Copa America friendlies, and it did not go well. They suffered a 5-1 defeat to Colombia. John Arias and Rafael Santos Borré scored in the first half. Team UA pulled one back early in the second half, and then Colombia poured it on late. Richard Rios, Jorge Carrascal, and Luis Sinisterra all on target. It's the U.S.'s worst loss since a 4-0 qualifying defeat to Costa Rica in 2016, which spelled the end for Jurgen Klinsmann. And the first time they've conceded 5 goals in a game since a 5-0 defeat to Mexico in the 2009 Gold Cup final. Shout out to Stu Holden, who was involved in that one. We were supposed to tape a Spaces after this game. We didn't. Why don't you explain to the folks why, and then give us your thoughts on the game?
Okay, so first and foremost, I am forever associated, and proudly so, with the game of soccer. It is how I make my living. It is how I have made my living for decades now. But I do have a life beyond soccer. My daughter graduated this weekend, and in the schedule that is graduation, anybody's been through it, you know that it's incredibly hectic. And I overlooked when it was going to be, and so I apologize that we didn't get to the Spaces, especially given the historic nature, as you mentioned, of this game. But I think I certainly can be forgiven. But it did provide a moment of perspective, because I'm up there in this monumental moment for my daughter and for her classmates and for a family, and kind of this this thing that many people go through. And I was incredibly proud, and it was incredibly moving, and she's moving on and doing all that kind of stuff. But knowing that this game was also going on, that I do have a connection to, and I have and that I care about, I started getting messages and alerts as to what was going on. And look, there are a lot of soccer people around, and so when the final score had happened, even though I had not seen the game live, people were talking about it. I went home and then watched the game. But when I start to think about the reaction, first off, it was interesting to see how many people, even in that type of setting, were interested and were following. But all of that is to say is that I did not see it live, and I did not experience it live. And a lot of the emotion, a lot of the passion, a lot of the vitriol was in the moment. And I'm not saying that it hasn't continued on since then, but there is a different type of experience when you watch something live and experience it with everybody, as opposed to when you go back. Now, I would love to say that I went back and watched the game and had a different visceral reaction to that performance and to that result. And I think it's more about the performance as opposed to the result, even the historic nature of it. By the way, I was never involved in a game to this magnitude in terms of a loss. So that's one thing that I can't be blamed for.
Wait a second. 93 Gold Cup semis, 4-0 against Mexico at the Azteca?
But that's not 5.
Same margin of victory, but not
no, but
as many
5
goals
is different.
conceded.
5 is different than 4.
Okay.
Even Rutgers taught me that. All right. So I went home. I watched the game. And this is, again, being, I guess, infected with, some of the, everything that people are texting me and people are calling me. And then obviously going on social media, which is what one does. This was, I think, a shameful and embarrassing, and to be quite honest, an unacceptable performance. All right. Does this mean that Greg Berhalter is a bad coach? Not necessarily. Does this mean that these players aren't good? Not necessarily. But it is concerning that in this moment, when we talked about, we were all looking for a reason to believe in this team, some a reason to believe in this team again, or some to a reason to believe in the team for the first time, against elite competition with 26 in the background. And not only did they not give us that, but the way in which they performed, and I use that term very loosely, I think gives a lot of people pause, and I think brings up a lot of questions. There was no authority on the field. And when I say authority, I mean authority that comes from a maturity that you expect from some of these players, given their pedigree. There was no direction, at times literal direction, in terms of how they wanted to play. And there was certainly no confidence. And I guess you could put a / swagger. And yes, confidence and swagger is something that you accumulate over time. But these are not boys anymore. These are men. And they looked like a team without confidence, direction, and authority. And this is a group, and this is a coach in Greg Berhalter, that have yet to prove that they can hang with elite competition. And that means that at least now, and certainly after that game, they are not elite. And if this U.S. men's national team is not elite, then they cannot win a World Cup. And make no mistake about it, winning a men's World Cup is the goal. And I don't think that it is delusional to have that type of goal. But after this 90 minutes, I think you look at it and say, we're a lot further away from ever reaching that goal than we certainly thought the 90 minutes before that game. This also, Mosse, and we've talked about this a couple of times over the past couple of months, this looked like a complacent and comfortable team. And that, to me, is really concerning. Because if these players feel that they cannot be replaced, if these players feel that no matter what they do, they are fine in terms of being on the team and in terms of being on the field, then that is a problem, not just for them, but that is a problem for Greg Berhalter. Now, I will talk about Greg Berhalter in a second. I want to hear your thoughts here. But I will say this finally. Soccer, maybe more so than any sport, is for the players. The responsibility and I guess the opportunity for the players in soccer, I think, is more so than any sport out there. When the whistle blows, managers, coaches, whatever you want to call them, I think they have the least amount of impact and, to a certain extent, responsibility. This was poor from the players on the field. And when they look around, they need to look no further than themselves and the other players that are in that room. They don't need to look at Greg Berhalter. They don't need to look at Matt Crocker. They don't need to look at the media. They don't need to look at anybody but themselves. And again, it was disappointing from a group that we expect more from. And who knows? Maybe we shouldn't expect more from them. Maybe, to quote the old movie, this is as good as it gets. But if this is as good as it gets, then there is a big problem. And if this is part of the process, then the process may be flawed.
You mentioned the pedigree of the players. The U.S. released their lineup an hour before kickoff. Opta put out the stat. It was the first time in program history that all 11 starters play in Europe's top 5 leagues. There was a lot of puffing out of the chest over that, and it was somewhat ironic that they got drilled by a team that had only 5 of their 11 starters play in Europe's top 5 leagues and only 1 of the 5 goal scorers. The first 3 goal scorers for Colombia don't even play in Europe. They all played in Brazil, Arias, Borré, and Rios. And I want to use that as a jumping off point to talk about Matt Turner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's dive into the actual game. So
I'm an unapologetic Euro snob, but even I draw the line at thinking that a goalkeeper is better off being a backup at a European club than being a starter in MLS. There are U.S. fans that think that because of the environment and the day-to-day training. But I'm sorry, that's been proven demonstrably untrue. We've seen both Zach Steffen and Matt Turner become worse goalkeepers by going to Europe. There's no arguing that Matt Turner today is a worse goalkeeper than he was 2 years ago. And, you know, listen, none of the 5 goals were mistakes per se. The Jamaica goal in the Nations League semis wasn't a mistake per se. But he's starting to let in a lot of could have done better on that one goals and goals that I think peak Matt Turner would have stopped. Matt Turner was once a transcendent shot stopper, and he's not that anymore. And that's an issue for the U.S. And we talked with Brad Friedel about this at the convention. It's something that U.S. goalkeepers have to be mindful of moving forward in terms of the moves they make to Europe, because putting yourself in a situation where you're not going to play is going to affect your form and is going to affect your play for the national team.
I can't agree more when it comes to Matt Turner. Time and time again, I was saying, save the ball. And we have seen Matt Turner over the years save those. Is it easy, and is it a complete flub by the goalkeeper? No, not necessarily. But Matt Turner right now is not making those saves, those big saves that enabled him to come in and take that spot from Zach Steffen. And again, there are no sacred cows, including Matt Turner. He is not doing the job, and he is not living up even to the high bar that he set. And if you can't even be Matt Turner as Matt Turner, then there's a problem. When we go through this, this performance and this lineup, so Matt Turner wasn't good enough. The back line was not good enough in terms of the defensive abilities and coming out of the back and the playing out of the back. There was a real concern that there was this romantic notion, and come hell or high water, this team was going to do what they wanted to. And what was also concerning was that Colombia on the other side said, these stupid Americans, they're just going to keep making risky passes. They're going to keep forcing situations, and we are going to be the beneficiaries out of it. Jedi was overloaded at times on that right-hand side, on his left-hand side, obviously. Johnny, again, was the U.S. men's national team Johnny, as opposed to the club Johnny, which is what we need him to be. Gio Reyna was non-existent for the most part. And Colombia ultimately probably should have scored 7 goals, given the opportunities that they had. We were sloppy. We were slow out of the back. Bad first touches, back decision-making. Chris Richards looked disinterested, as he often does, but he also looked tired. And yes, you can talk about the Weah giveaway, and you can talk about the Cameron Carter-Vickers pass out of the back and Pepe not checking and all that kind of stuff. It looked like they were each individually playing in a different way, collectively playing in a different way, and the way that they wanted to play, they're not good enough to play. And maybe we've been saying this for years, but it really, really was clear and evident in the game against Colombia.
I think center back is the weakest position for the U.S. national team. When we talk about how talented this pool of players is, golden generation and all the rest, and we go position by position, that's the one area that I think people are forcing it and talking themselves into certain players being better than they are. I think the likes of Chris Richards, Cameron Carter-Vickers, Mark McKenzie, even Tim Ream, who's now 36, lost his starting job at Fulham and is now likely going to go to MLS this summer. They're all just okay. I don't really see a really commanding, elite, world-class center back in that group. So I think when you go up against quality opposition, that's going to be a weakness that other teams are going to be able to exploit.
I was talking earlier about perspective, going to my daughter's graduation, and there is certainly a bigger world out there, and one that's well beyond soccer for all of us, even though we love soccer and work in soccer. But perspective in sports is not something that you often talk about. And I would even argue is not even necessary. If you can find some perspective, that is good. So are we chicken littling here when it comes to this day? In that I haven't seen so many U.S. players individually and collectively all play bad in a long time for this team. And was it just one of those days, or is that the easy way out?
I was thinking about this a lot in the last couple of days as I observed the discourse around this game. I don't know if this addresses what you just brought up, but I think it's sort of related. The U.S. is attempting to do something that's never been done before. No nation outside of Europe or South America has ever cracked the elite of this sport. There have been 22 World Cups. They've all been won by Europe or South America. No team from outside those two regions has ever gotten to a World Cup final. There have only been 3 semifinalists from outside those two regions. One of them was the U.S. in 1930, the first ever World Cup, then South Korea 2002 and Morocco in 2022. So trying to become elite while playing in CONCACAF means that you sort of turn the tables on the traditional relationship between friendlies and competitive matches. People look at friendlies against quality teams from other regions as more meaningful than most of the competitive matches you play. So it creates this disconnect. You still have people like our colleague Colin Cowherd, who's operating by the traditional playbook of how we tend to look at these things. He said, Young USMNT fans are so predictable it hurts. Team lost a friendly, emphasis on friendly, in preparation for Copa. The stampede to fire Greg Berhalter is underway. Every Liam, Holden, Fallon, and Beckett are demanding they burn the house down. Hashtag deep breaths. So he's viewing it as it's only a friendly, calm down. What really matters is the Copa America. But you said last week that part of you feels like these friendlies against Colombia and Brazil are actually more meaningful than the first two Copa games against Bolivia and Panama. I understand where you're coming from, because in the grand scheme of things, as the U.S. tries to become elite, you're looking for relevant data points against elite opponents. So how we measure the caliber of opponent versus the context surrounding a match, one being a friendly, another being a competitive game that actually counts for 3 points and advancing from a group, it's going to be kind of interesting moving forward.
You like that clip? Well, my State of the Union podcast drops twice a week right here on my very own YouTube page. The only way to stay up to date is to hit that subscribe button down below. Size the day, and see you soon.